Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I know you don't want to stop eating your delicious food and conversation with your esteemed table mates, but now you're going to listen to Erica and me. And Bill Murphy. So it won't just be the Bill and Erica show. There will be some other people that we have planned. They're not going to be ad-libbing. It's like, I got them down to like seconds. And they will come up to interrupt our monologues. And, so soon. Oh, crap, it's only 2 minutes.
Give him the hook.
What else do we need to say? Let's go. And there's going to be a few shout outs, so don't be shy. We'll let you know what you're supposed to shout out just for the hell of it. And here we go. It's late 1954, early 1955, and somewhere out there, or more aptly, somewhere inside our moms, we're readying ourselves for our grand entrance, this big journey called life. I know, it's a battle of the Bills, and I'm going to win, for sure. Did you hear any of that? It's late 1954, early 1955, and somewhere out there, or more aptly, somewhere inside our moms, we're readying ourselves for our grand entrance, this big journey called life. Many of us arrived through the Earth portal at the old Stanford Hospital. Oh, yeah. Amidst curses and groans, smiles and tears, we're a small constellation of stars gathering together for exactly what remains yet to be seen. How many people were born at the old Stanford Hospital? Yeah, a lot of people.
The population of the USA when we were born was about 161 million. And whether by chance or unfathomable cosmic, this is Bill's material, you can say, unfathomable cosmic karma, we arrived at the same time to this particular place, Palo Alto, California, the United States, planet Earth, the Milky Way galaxy. We might have landed in Mountain View, San Jose, or even Milpitas, but no, for some reason we needed to be a batch of cookies right here in Palo Alto.
Mr. Sandman was at the top of the chart. Dwight Eisenhower Ike was the 34th President of the United States. Milk was still being delivered to our kitchen doors, remember that? Gas cost 23 cents. Girdles and garters still tormented the female form. I Love Lucy and Lassie ruled the airwaves. And seatbelts were still somewhere off in the future. In July of that year, Disneyland in Anaheim opened, becoming an enduring backdrop to our baby boomer lives. How lucky we are that our parents decided to move here. My mom, Jane Carl, who grew up in a podunk town in Ohio, and Jack Strube, my father from Chicago, made at least one wise choice in life. Moving to Palo Alto. Erica, where did your parents come from?
My father was a Holocaust survivor who landed in San Francisco, met my mom there, and she was an editor for Sunset Magazine. They came to Palo Alto because of the intellectual atmosphere and the public schools. And they were the original founders of the Committee for Green Foothills, which are still active today.
A few families, such as Victoria Humphreys, had lived here for several generations. Tony Hughes's military parents met during the war and decided to stay. But many arrived in the 40s and 50s from the Midwest or somewhere back east. But Suzanne Hildebrand's arrival was far more circuitous.
Thank you. So I got to talk a little bit about Suzanne Hildebrand. She was a classmate of ours. This classmate was born in Jakarta to parents of Swiss, Dutch, and Indonesian descent. After being born months later, the family immigrated to the Netherlands and settled in Luxembourg. Sounds like our typical upbringing, right? So in 1961, she was 6 years old, and the family immigrated to America by sailing from Amsterdam to New York City and then into Palo Alto. They were assisted in these efforts through families involved in a group called the Catholic Charities, and local families were involved in getting her family here, were my parents, the Purcells, and the Mertens. Carl Purcell was at Palo Alto High School. He's not here tonight. But it's something that I didn't know about, that my parents helped her parents and her family get here. But Suzanne and her family were here, and Suzanne went to many schools while growing up here in Palo Alto. She went to Crescent Park, Addison, Walter Hayes, Garland, Van Auken, Ross Road, Jordan, Woodside High School, and Palo Alto High School. So chances are that she was in a class with one of you at some time. She also, her family added 2 sisters, and in 1971, the family moved to Hawaii, but she stayed here. In 1981, she met a San Mateo sheriff deputy who introduced her to another sheriff employee who was also Dutch and Indonesian, and this led her to being employed by the sheriff's department for 37 years until she retired in 2019 after 37 years. She now cares for her mother and her 2 sisters and lives in Hawaii part-time. And this is Suzanne Hildebrand's story that I didn't know about, and I just wanted to share her background with all of you because it's just a little bit different from my upbringing. So Suzanne, welcome.
It was California dreamin', California girls, surfing USA, sitting on the dock of the bay, all rolled into one. But the dark side did eventually rear its head. Earthquakes, 2 grade B actors as governor, Charles Manson, the Jim Jones cult, droughts and fires. And this year, floods and snow. Snow levels that even the Donner Party didn't have to contend with.
One of my earliest memories, it's Halloween. I'm outside our Eichler on DeSoto Drive, and the smell of those little grease paint sticks that looked like bullets, and I smelled it once when I was in Massachusetts, and I was immediately transported back in time.
It's said that smell is our most primitive sense, triggering in our reptilian brain memories of a specific moment in time. Remember that swampy smell of the creek while watching tadpoles? Catching, stepping into the Fran's smoke shop, hiking, biking on Channing, and smoke wafting from the St. Albert's incinerator. It's spring break at the boathouse, suntan lotion, algae water, and for some folks, marijuana.
The scent of the enormous magnolia flowers lining the streets, a weekend morning in the station wagon with your dad, going to the garbage dump, that sweet, rotting smell. You're careening down Page Mill Road on your bike, and the unique aroma of California summer. Creosote bush, California sagebush, laurel mingled with the incoming fog.
Most of us spent our early years scattered around Palo Alto in our elementary school pods.
In 1959, another cultural moment was to debut. Well, I received Mr. Potato Head. Geez, what were my parents thinking? My sister got the original beach Barbie in the black and white bathing suit. Well, she didn't keep it for long. How many of you ladies got one of those? Well, you know, I got Ken and Alan. I knew something was creepy was going on. Instead of combing the crap out of her hair, yanking her legs off are your brothers, Alan, Marcia, and Miriam's. What did you do to their dolls? Or your brother setting her afire. Too bad you weren't prescient enough to have kept her in the box and mine her fortune on eBay to subsidize the rest of your life. Who has seen Barbie, the movie? Yes. Don't be shy. Oh, well, you gotta see it. You gotta see it. My favorite line is when Ken says, Barbie? You didn't tell me about the patriarchy. And horses are just men extenders.
1, 2,
3, 4. Tell the people what she wore.
It's a silly song, but the two-piece bathing suit making inroads into America was actually named that because nuclear bombs were being tested in the Bikini Atoll. Which brings us to the second summer blockbuster, Oppenheimer, which is about the patriarchy on steroids, risking blowing everyone to smithereens and ruining Barbie's modeling career. That was the existential dichotomy we grew up under and are still threatened by. Disney and Barbie, the Cold War and Duck and Cover, the underlying memes of our formative years. And well, no wonder most of us needed therapy. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Who remembers what happened on the night of January 21st, 1962?
Who remembers? No.
Yes. No. That white stuff drifting from the sky that some of us had never seen before created our first indelible collective memory. And who doesn't remember that day?
I do.
Mark. Most children think their hometown is the best, the coolest, the most fun. No one could have fathomed what Palo Alto would become several decades later. But back then, it really was a wonderful place to grow up in. Unbeatable climate, tree-lined streets, progressive education, and the advantages of being a university town. You could swim in Pescadero on Saturday and be skiing in the Sierra Slopes on Sunday.
The mini amusement park in the parking lot of Town and Country, the annual May Day parade down University Avenue, Children's Museum, the pedal cars and waiting pool at Mitchell Park, Rapp's shoe store with the electric train and talking Mina Bird, buying Christopher medallions at Channing Market, woo! The Indian Bowl, Irma Schwabel's Notions, Frenchman's Tower, Big Game Bonfire, Halloween night at Eleanor Park.
And the Children's Theater. Did you know that it's the oldest continuously operating children's theater in the United States? Pat Briggs became director in 1961 and amazingly directed over 500 plays until she retired in 2008. The great thing about it was you could totally blow your lines and still get an applause because mom and dad were probably in the audience. How many made your stage debut at the Children's Theater? Oh, wow. I was in Johnny Appleseed. Erica was in the same play, and so were Teresa and Rosie McCarty. And none of us knew each other yet because we were still between 6th and 7th grade and we had all been in different schools. We just kind of rediscovered that. Were you the witch? You were Hansel.
I was eaten by a witch.
I left my heart in San Francisco.
Remember what a huge deal it was going to the city? Girls donned Mary Janes and white gloves, the boys dolled up in jackets and ties. You'd board the train at the commuter depot. The best part was, well, Bill wrote this, watching the tracks whooshing by through the toilet, up to the top of the mark for a Virgin Shirley Temple, the thrill of sitting on the outside bench of the trolley cars, the Christmas tree at the city of Paris, dinner at Tommy's Joint or Tadich's. The city was a place to aspire to, and Haight-Ashbury was still a few years into the future. Goodbye, Mary Janes. Hello, Mary Jane.
Another defining moment shattered our American bubble. Minutes before lunch recess, the office secretary entered our third grade classroom and whispered in our teacher's ear. I'll never forget the expression of shock, then crumpling into grief on Mrs. Norris's face. Once she composed herself, with tears streaming down her cheeks, she turned and said, "President Kennedy has just been killed." Outside, the fourth grade teacher, Mr. Empey, was weeping. I'd never seen an adult, not to mention a man, crying before, so I knew something really bad must have just happened.
But then this happened.
It's February 1964. My older sister Janice is in a tizzy during dinner because something called The Beatles was going to be on TV. I pictured a Chillers from Science Fiction episode, maybe giant bugs rampaging through the city. I couldn't fathom why all those girls were shrieking and sobbing. It was so boring, it was so stupid.
Not at all. In January 1966, the #1 song was this unfortunate tune, "These Boots Are Made for Walkin'." And they could only be performed in white mod go-go boots. In the mid-1960s, we were blessed by the genius of Simon and Garfunkel, who along with the likes of the Beatles, Rolling Stones, the Supremes, the Temptations, and the Doors, became the enduring soundtrack of our formative years. Besides popular songs, every locale broadcasts its own unique soundscape. Palo Alto's included the forlorn whistle of the commuter trains, owls in the trees at Rinconada Park, 6 o'clock p.m. church bells at St. Albert's telling us to head home for dinner. In the fall, the crunching of sycamore leaves in the gutters, the tinkling bell of the Good Humor Man, the clarion bells of Hoover Tower, concerts at Frost Amphitheater, Country Joe and the Fish, Grateful Dead, okay, Quicksilver, Sons of Champlin, Santana.
Perhaps more easily forgotten is the sense of touch, the tactile feel of Palo Alto. Dipping a finger in the holy water font at St. Albert's, for those of you who are Catholic, lying on the sun-warmed belly of the cement bear at Mitchell Park, and if you were brave enough to jump off its head, the icky feel of the gum under the counter at Woolworths, the scratchy fur on the back of the donkeys at the annual basketball game at Jordan, and those horrid, stinking, worn towels at the Jordan gym.
And those horrid one-piece button-up blue bloomers that we girls had to endure for gym, accentuating our cellulite before we even knew it was a word.
And maybe da 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 da. Similar to other grade schools, Crescent Park reflected the microcosm of how America imagined itself to be, the proverbial melting pot. In a class of 30 kids, we had 3 or 4 Catholics. I was one of them. Several Jewish kids, 1 Chinese boy, 1 Japanese girl, 2 black kids, and 1 Arab, Charlie Ferris. In that final week of 6th grade, when the Six-Day War broke out, I remember how Josh Wolf and Robert Shirk ganged up on poor Charlie. The rest of us were clueless and just wanted to play dodgeball. Now that I live on a kibbutz in what I fondly call the very unholy land, I understand what all that yelling was about. Decades later, some things have not changed at all.
It's the fall of 1967. We're big kids now, and we're tossed together at Jordan Junior High. All these unfamiliar faces, making new friends, and like stones in a rock tumbler for the next 6 years, bumping and grating against each other slowly. That's kind of literal. Slowly smoothing out our rough edges.
You know what's strange? I still can remember the combination of my locker and cue hall. 38, 32, 38, 14. I do it sometimes in my sleep. Who can remember their locker number? Anybody? What is it?
Wait a minute. Number 11, that's a combination or the locker number?
No, the combination.
1127.5.
Okay. I'm not the only freak. Anyone else?
422.
Okay. That's right. Okay, see, there are some operating memory cells. Okay. Oh, okay. And that summer, 67, the best rock song of all time.
Oh, I get you out twice.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
I think it was Sunshine of Your Love. He thinks it was Light My Fire.
Yeah, different. And then that song that repeated ad nauseum at the Jordan lunchtime courtyard. Do you remember what song that was? White bird in a golden cage on a wind. There were like 4 songs and that one was over and over. For many of us, our first venture into altruism was the Gilroy Christmas Project. The homeroom collecting the most stuff won. But since it was by weight, some of the clever ones like Doug Peck started hauling in broken washers and dryers, car tires, bricks. Remember the pouring rain, the mud, the dirt floors of the farm workers' shacks, and the kids' shy smiles when receiving the food and gifts from us. In contrast to the ease in which I lived and most of us lived, it was my first glimpse of poverty and inequality. We thought we were doing good, and perhaps we were, but looking back, it now seems misguided. That night, back at home, I remember in bed, I cried. I knew that this was not how the world was supposed to be, and it made me want to create a remade world.
So here's a shocking fact. In 1968, only 9 women were enrolled at Stanford University's sophomore medical class. In the U.S. Congress, we had 11 women and 1 in the Senate. Title IX came into being in 1972, and life for women and girls had always been unfair, but in the winter of 1970, the girls at Jordan made a baby step toward equality. It had been a week of unusually cold weather, and so we all started wearing jeans because it was so freezing when we rode our bikes to school. Eventually, Principal Dr. Seeley said girls could wear jeans until it warmed up. Well, it did eventually warm up, but our bell bottoms and our stylish pantsuits remained.
Societies move in cycles, and it seems we're currently mired in temporary retrograde. But as Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. Otherwise, children would still be toiling in coal mines, women deemed too feeble-minded to vote, gay people would be arrested for their choice of love, interracial marriage would be taboo, and the weekend as we know it wouldn't exist.
Speaking of racial laws, Gregory McAllister died last year, and I recently discovered something about his parents. His dad, Robert, was asked to withdraw from Earlham College in Indiana after he refused to cancel his marriage to Grace Cunningham because she was a Negro. The college's president called the wedding impetuous and, quote, "The institution has a policy of discouraging hasty, youthful, interracial marriages because they present problems in the present-day society." Fortunately, Robert defied school policy, was ousted, and in June married Grace. Later, Greg told Suzanne Brennan, when Sue's mother died, that he had always had a soft spot for her mother because Joan was the only mother in the neighborhood who reached out to Grace in friendship when they first moved in. I miss Gregory. and being here tonight, and we went to all the reunions. So this is for you, Greg.
And that was in our lifetimes. Who was in the Jordan Ski Club or went on a Jordan ski trip? What could possibly go wrong with 2 busloads of 8th and 9th graders accompanied by 3 or 4 chaperones for a weekend at Heavenly Valley or Squaw Valley? It was my first experience being away without my parents. The Stoners, Josh, Steve Vogel, Kathy Bjorn, Carol Wright, Lorna, Carl Florent, we're all smoking joints in room 23 and we're vaguely worried about the chaperones. So Miss Rayner and Mr. Warren and others, that they'll catch us. So I'm sent down the hallway to scout them out. But wafting out from under their door is pot smoke. No worries, all's good. A dozen kids are piled onto the queen beds watching a movie. Does anyone remember the movie? Yes. What? Birds, the birds. And on the bed, so we had 10, 15 people on the bed. You inserted a quarter and the bed vibrated. We didn't know how that was supposed to excite us, but it was a lot of fun. We're stoned and tipsy on blackberry brandy. The bed is jiggling away and bed collapses. Never was more fun had on a quarter. Sunday afternoon, we're all back on the bus waiting and waiting for Becky Lancaster to show up. Last seen flirting with the lift guy on the Black Diamond Run.
Towards the end of 9th grade, at our talent show, was a bunch of girls with long hair. Sarah Lowe, Doris Fong, Anita Lucebrink among them, in a moving circle singing songs from Hair. Summer passed, and then we were off to Palo, which was still that labyrinth of puke green hallways, the courtyard amphitheater, the tower, the old administration building with the chapel-like library. We were the last class to be in that old school, and by 12th grade, it was all history. Remember that prank someone pulled smearing Limburger cheese in the underground air ducts? That place really did smell like puke.
Life in Palo Alto was pretty nice for most of us most of the time. Of course, there was meanness, unpleasantries. Divorce was uncommon. And few of us had yet to experience profound loss. The first time death intruded into my life and many others was after 7th grade when Liz Jernberg was killed in a car crash. Carlene Dezo and Crystal Eifert died young. Jim Hamilton's brother was killed in a car accident. Lisa Stevenson's mother passed away. One day they were there and the next day gone. Most of us lacked the vocabulary and social acumen to comfort the grieving. How lonely it must have been for the bereaved. Then in college, Simon Hassett took his own life, and in 1976, Josh Wolfe died in an airplane crash.
The only thing worse than getting old is perhaps not having had the chance to get old at all. Most of our parents and some siblings and friends are already gone. As of now, some 50 plus classmates have died. Valerie Miller, my old neighbor, passing on in July. In the back is a board that has the names of classmates and friends who are no longer with us. Kathy Sorensen is now demonstrating.
Okay, you've got a friend. Of course, there were flirtations and flings, crushes. Some requited, probably many more not so much. But a few eventually became something more, marriage. Among our classmates, Kathy Sorensen and John Burma. Is John still here? Craig Sang and Suzanne Mathrus. And Debbie Bacchus married our Jordan friend, Jack Kuhlman. Did I miss anybody else? I think that's it. Oh, well, it's classmates, but Lisa and Mike.
But for most of us, what has endured through these decades are the friendships. People who know your every flaw and foible, ups and downs, and still love you. Christy Hale is an award-winning children's book illustrator and author who will now share about her lifelong friendship with the late Nancy Jameson.
So some of you went from kindergarten through high school together, and you can't remember when you met. You have a sense that you've always been there. Okay, you have a sense that you've always been there. I can still visualize the first time I saw Nancy Jameson. It was 7th grade PE class on the Jordan field, and Nancy was tying a penny over her blue snap-up gym suit as Miss Pfaff divided teams for field hockey. Nancy and I were cast as twins for a play in our 7th period drama class, and that created a special bond we enjoyed for 54 years. Nancy continued her involvement in theater, and you may remember her. She had a powerful voice, and she was in Jordan and Palo musical productions. Nancy's other big interest was psychology. She was eager to understand everything about people. The two of us used to ride Caltrain to San Francisco, and we'd sit on the upper level, and we'd look down and randomly pick out someone of interest, and then we'd make up their life story. And this was just like an endlessly fascinating game. So Nancy pursued her interest in psychology at Lewis and Clark College, and I went there too. And there we shared a dorm the first year, a room the second year, and friends both years. After, Nancy transferred to Stanford, but we continued to maintain and connect whenever possible. So a lot of life happened in the decades of our friendship, and some of it was difficult. I witnessed Nancy's struggle with the dissolution of a 25-year-long marriage. Nancy proved resilient, though, eventually remarrying a wonderful partner. And additionally, she began important life work. In 2005, she became the president and CEO of San Diego Grantmakers, and under her leadership, the network blossomed to more than 150 organizations, funders, and investors. And Nancy's earnestness, joy, and curiosity was infectious, and she inspired those around her to believe that every day we can each contribute to making things better. Nancy became increasingly aware of and committed to the need for philanthropy to address inequality and racism. The Nancy Jameson Fund for Social Justice was established to continue her important work. So I remember the last time I saw Nancy. It was May 1st, 2021. In her home in San Diego, she lay in a hospital bed looking out at the sky. I had known that Nancy was dying. She called me days after she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, and we spoke many times during the 18 months she hung on. Even so, I'd been hesitant to invade the last stretch of her life, wondering if this should be a time reserved for family only. But this was during the pandemic, and no one was really going anywhere. However, 2 days before I saw her, her husband had called me and begged me to come down to say goodbye. And he said one of the loveliest things. He said, "You were part of the furniture of Nancy's life." And I feel like this describes exactly why we're all here, gathered at this reunion. We are part of the furniture of each other's lives, and we can both offer and take great comfort from one another.
Some of the memorable tastes of our childhood: sticking your damp finger in the Jell-O box and licking it off, tuna casserole with potato chips on top, those Jordan chocolate milkshakes with the big lump, those amazingly thick cheese house sandwiches on pumpernickel bread, Blum's coffee crunch cake, Slurpees at 7-Eleven, Edie's Emerald Isle and licorice ice cream at Halloween, burgers at Whiskey Gulch at Harry's with the wall of photos and you got a free burger on your birthday.
For many people, school sports was an important aspect of school, a unifying factor, an opportunity to develop new friendships, and a chance to discover things about oneself. Greg Sincere is going to tell us, Dr. Gregory Sincere is going to tell us a little about a sports feel of his.
Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I want to let you know there's a statute of limitations for, let's see, Monks, Hamilton, Boyette, and Melberg. Would you all please leave the room right now? Go ahead and take some time. Did they leave? Oh, I guess not. Okay. Well, sense of humor is really important in my life. A sense of humor is that better, Bill? Is that good? Okay, thank you. Is this better? I'll start again. Sense of humor in my life has been critical. I love laughing. Mostly it's at myself because that became a safe thing to do, especially in my profession. I was asked to speak about sports, and I went, thanks a lot, Bill.
It wasn't my field of expertise.
Oh, shut up, it was too. Listen, I'm still pissed because we were playing volleyball, and you threw one when I jumped out of the square and I skinned my elbows trying to get it. Is that a good memory or what? Yes or no? Come on, let's hear it. Yeah, true story. All right. As some of you athletes in here know, or many of you are athletes perhaps, and a lot of us played together, which was a lot of fun. We had that 0-10 season, which we'd rather forget. And then the next year, what happened? Boom. Hey, winning. This is really fun. So I'm going to just give you a couple of things about sports because I'm going to just discuss the later part of my life and how sports were important. We all love to compete. That's why we play. It was fun, right? We developed a sense of confidence, helped some relationships, made relationships, right? Success and failure. Honesty and integrity. Pretty important, right? You either hit the pitch or you didn't. You either caught the pass or you didn't. You either made the block or you didn't. And remember our old coach, Mr. Peterson? Who's his grandson play for right now? Who said that? What? The San Francisco Giants, right? Jock Peterson. Right? Yeah, center field. Well, he plays different positions. So the number one thing that I found that helped me was it developed a sense of toughness and sacrifice. But what we often forget is what's the bottom line of being on a team? Shout something out, anybody. What? Teamwork. What else? Friendship. Camaraderie. You're missing the easiest one. Winning? Fitness. Right, farmer? Oh, don't fall asleep. I'll go wake your ass. I'll wake you up. Fitness is very important. That shall be a cornerstone for the rest of my life, and it still is. I'll go back to that. So here comes the litany of sports. Green Gables. Who went to Green Gables in here? Woohoo! Steve DePanger, ladies and gentlemen. I was on his Little League team. Let's hear it for Steve DePanger. Woohoo! I know, you're going to kick my butt. So had a lovely time. And actually, Karen Lehman, her brother, Eric Lehman, you remember him, Steve? Here's how I hit against her brother. True or false? Right? Yeah, he was scary. So Green Gables, football, and where's Jim Hamilton? That was his fault. I still have the page that had the plays on it that he helped me figure out. Let's hear it for Jim Hamilton, everybody. Basketball, and you could tell I was real tall, so I went, well, never mind. Then came Jordan, so there was football, Pop Warner. Bob Rice is in here, and Boyette's here, I know. Is there anyone that played Palo Alto Pop Warner with me? I don't think there is in this room. Oh, Mark, my bad, but you left before I got there. Yes, but Bob Rice is in here. Okay, so here comes Jordan, football, Pop Warner, baseball, Babe Ruth, soccer, Pally, football, baseball, American Legion, soccer, and then Mental College was football and baseball. But then I took a class called psychology. Who else? Someone studied psychology earlier. Who was that? You can raise your hand, Julia. It's okay. All right. And I know you're a counselor. So, but I developed a love of psychology, and that really got big for me later on. So I went on a ride-along with someone's brother in this room.
Greg.
Where's Greg Monks? I went on a ride-along with his brother. It was during Thanksgiving. I was trying to sign a contract with the San Francisco Giants. He says, come on and ride with me. I go, I'm like, what? I'm not riding. Forget it. He goes, come on, you sissy. Come ride with me. So he threw down the gauntlet. And being the macho type that I was, I'm not going to let Jeff Monks or anyone else tell me what to do. I got bitten by the bug. I was trying to sign a contract with the Giants. I said, forget that. I'd rather go with Jeff Monks in a ride-along, which I did. So I went on the ride-along. I loved it. I became a reserve at Atherton Police shortly thereafter. Then Jeff decided to go to San Jose Police. Guess what I did? Went to San Jose Police. Why? Because if you want to be a little police officer or real anything, what do you have to do? You got to go where it happens, right? Yes or no? People say, well, Greg, why didn't you stay at Atherton? I said, well, because I want to become a real cop. Sorry, Atherton. And I know you live there. Don't get mad at me. Do you know how many times I went around your house on patrol checks before you lived there? A lot. So anyway, went to San Jose Police, became a hostage negotiator, and here's where psychology comes in again. Went back to graduate school, got a master's degree in psychology. Then my expertise became crisis. And this is heavy duty shit. Sorry for the expression. It was life and death all the time. Life and death. When I got a call at 3 in the morning, I didn't know if I was going to come home or not. But I did, thank God. And saved a lot of lives that I'm very proud of. So I was a hostage negotiator for 28 years with San Jose Police. Then I went back to graduate school. I became doctor. And I increased my credibility. Then I went into something called the Crisis Management Unit, which handles severely mentally ill. Even to this day, I do that in a private business. And so I'm extremely proud of the fact that I became an athlete, because what did that do? It gave me all those things I talked about earlier. Stamina, honesty, integrity, all those things that made it critical for me to be a great hostage negotiator. And with that, I know I've gone way over the time, but that's all I have. Thank you.
In the middle of 11th grade, Simon Hassett, Leanne Cummings, and I met with two teachers, Dave Alford and Kurt Johnson, and began dreaming up what would become the following year Vistara Alternative Apple Pie High. Part of the zeitgeist of the times, it lasted only 5 years, but afforded a creative and supportive place for students to learn outside of the box. Mike.
I'm having a great time. How about you? This is great. Well, last summer, the Palo Alternative School had a reunion at Foothill Park, but as they say, Karen and I got the COVID, and we couldn't attend. So this is what I would have said if I was there. 11th grade was a really difficult time for me. By October, I'd flunked out of Mr. Martin's physics class, and by the spring, Mr. Jenkins made it clear that calculus was not in my future. And the only classes that I was really interested in were Pat Presto's journalism class and Kurt Johnson's English class. And so when Kurt told me that he was going to start up this alternative school, I was all in for that. That senior year upstairs in the old Pally building completely changed my life. Yes, there was some goofing off. There was some horseplay, right? Or let's just call it exploratory learning by experience, right? Now, I can't speak for everyone, But for me, that year was completely transformative. I completely embraced my education. I got into nature and science and art, and especially music. And I read over 100 books. Now, a lot of those were science fiction. Thanks to Paul Freitag. Is Paul still here? Yeah, it's because of you, Paul. I remember going and being in your room and talking about H.P. Lovecraft, right? And that got me thinking about how much there was to read. So I read so much that year. And the point was, I was engaged. And that experience set me on a path that I've followed for the rest of my life. So let me offer a toast. Here's to learning to learn, loving to learn, and learning to love. And here's to all of the teachers and the graduates of the Star Alternative Apple Pie High class of 1973. I have buttons for anybody who was in that class and would like one. Thanks for the chance to do this.
The Vietnam War was the tragic backdrop to our high school years. The songs, protests, Lytton Plaza, strikes and sit-ins at Stanford, the news clips from Southeast Asia. Though the war didn't officially end until 1975, fortunately, we were young enough to have escaped the maws of the Selective Service. But there was the nagging anxiety of our older brothers being drafted. In the end, it was just one long, senseless exercise in futility. 2 years after the first Earth Day in 1970, an iconic photo was taken in 1972 during the Apollo 17 flight. Captured from 18,000 miles in space, it was the first time we'd seen a photo of the Earth in its entirety. It forever changed the way we visualized our planet. This tiny, precarious blue marble of life suspended in the void. Incredibly beautiful, precious, our home. Many astronauts, after returning to Earth, say they no longer could identify with a specific nationality, but rather belong to one people, one Earth. That cognitive shift has a name. It's called the overview effect. In short, it's awe. Transcended moments that challenge our perception of time and space, diminishing our egos, making us feel a part of something far greater, imbuing us with a desire to help others.
And many of our class have done just that, helping others. Steve DePanger has a BA and an MA in history, is headmaster of a K-12 Christian academy that serves homeschooling families in the South Bay area, and Steve is going to talk about Ted Hicks.
In 2009, through Facebook, Ted Hicks and I reestablished contact for the first time since 1973. With a flood of reminiscences to follow, our years at Jordan, summer days in his swimming pool, Eleanor Park, bike rides into the foothills and Santa Cruz Mountains. Ted's side of the correspondence was filled with Ted. Let me give you some of his words. First quote. From 1985 to 1993, I'd been living in Sacramento and running a rare coin investment company when the coin market collapsed. Not interested in sitting around moaning about life, I walked away from it all, but with no idea what to do next. I was single at the time and decided to fly to the northern Midwest, buy a Zodiac boat and pull a Huck Finn and float down the Mississippi. Around then, in 1990, an old friend called from San Diego and said he was going to the USSR to start some AA meetings. I said, okie dokie, I think I'll join you. In a later email, he added, a few of us were in the amazing position to help bring AA to the USSR. The problem Soviets faced was way too big to address in a few weeks, and so I started First Light Partners. That's the end of the quote. To backtrack a bit, in the years after high school, Ted went through a rough patch In his own drinking, it had become very serious, and after, quote, pretty much destroying my life and the lives of everyone around me, ugly stuff, I got sober in 1984, end quote. I looked around for some articles about First Light Partners, and here's something I found from Radio Free Europe in 1994. An estimated 5 million alcoholics live in Ukraine, usually treated with contempt by health officials and psychiatrists. Many are repeatedly arrested, locked up in prison-like drying out centers and subjected to humiliating and ineffective treatment. In contrast, the therapy offered by First Light Partners is civilized, humane, and an effective option that invites alcoholics to come to terms with their addiction and fight it as a disease that they do not have to be ashamed of. End of quote for that article. An unexpected blessing happened to Ted while in Ukraine. He met the love of his life, Natalia and his daughter Victoria. Eventually, Ted and Natalia married, and with Victoria moved back to Oregon. This was all just so Ted. I can't convey it except as much as I can in his words. In another email, Ted made these thoughtful comments after I had shared with him that I had been to Romania twice in the 1990s. Here's what he said. I was thrilled to read that you'd been in Romania. The Eastern Bloc is a place that simply can't be described. It has to be seen and felt at every level. When in villages like you were in, it's another world, another century, another life. It's also strangely spiritual. I imagine because with generation after generation walking the same dusty roads, they're incredibly connected with the earth. I love it, but I'm glad I had dollars in my pocket and a return trip home. I am so grateful for the friendship that Ted and I shared back in the day, and for the seemingly random reconnection 30 plus years later. In my own memory, Ted sparkles and he makes me laugh. I miss the dark part of his life, which he occasionally addressed in our letters together with a very frank sadness. That Ted was able to transform his personal struggle while also giving hope to alcoholics in Russia and Ukraine through First Light Partners is a testimony to his strength, vitality, and perhaps I can also say his faith. God bless you, Ted.
Well, we're getting the proverbial hook because, you know, there's a lot to say. So we're gonna have to hack some of this. We'll figure out how to do it. They're giving us a little overtime. Watergate was roiling the country, and at our graduation, several classmates stood up with a passed-around Nixon mask as the names of bogus classmates. Howard Hunt,
Gordon Liddy, and John Dean were read aloud. And here we are 50 summers later with more indictments than the number of my functioning brain cells.
Sorry, Lisa, I had to put in some politics. Who could ever have imagined that one day we'd wax nostalgic about the Boy Scout-like hijinks of Richard Nixon? So we graduate, go our own ways to college, travel, discover ourselves. If I could go back in time, I'd wish I thought of teachers as more human, with full lives, loves, and challenges. I adored Dorothea Hamilton and Kurt Johnson, and however old-fashioned she was, Mrs. Stuber, our 9th grade English teacher, who helped me to grasp and perhaps even love the intricacies of the English language. I can't say it was because of her, but I did eventually become a writer, author, playwright, and journalist. Erica, what teacher was one of your favorites?
Well, I could only think of Paul Bataille, who taught me how to drive, and was a coach that looked like Jiminy Cricket to me.
Okay, we're skipping the part about the groovy 60s and 70s, sorry. Who had a waterbed? Oh, okay, that's all I needed to know about that. There was a lot of others. That explains a lot of things about y'all.
So remember the saying, never trust anyone over 30? And here we are. Around the time of our 11th reunion, I'm not sure how we missed the 10th, we were getting married and becoming parents. Leanne was the first classmate to have a child, Vaughn, who's now an accomplished artist. Kurt Smith was the first of us to be a grandparent. Most had kids the regular way, but a few took the road less traveled. And here's Christy Hale again to talk about Linda Kramer. And Linda's alive.
In fact, Linda was hoping to be here, but she has COVID. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in August of 2019, no sooner had I arrived to visit Nancy Jameson when her phone rang. It was Linda Kramer. She had flown across the country. Oh, sorry. All right. No sooner had I arrived at Nancy Jameson's when her phone rang, and it was Linda Kramer. And she had flown across the country to visit San Diego with her 2 kids, Sarah and David. What perfect timing. Soon we 3 were having a surprise mini reunion. Years before, I stayed with Linda, her husband Alex, their daughter and son in their home outside Boston. My visit was long enough to observe true delight in all the daily rituals of playtime, feeding, bath, reading, and bedtime. This was a joyful home. Clearly, Linda and Alex loved parenting these 2 they had adopted from Guatemala. Both parents had special connections to Guatemala. Linda's from a 1971 trip she took with classmate Sue Shore. Alex's 2 brothers had once lived and worked in Guatemala. In 2000, Linda and Alex made 2 trips down, first to meet their daughter Sarah, and then a month later to bring her home. 2.5 years later, they returned to adopt David. Linda loved being a mom, and Alex was a great hands-on father. Because Alex had never smoked, the doctors never suspected that his chronic cough was anything serious. In 2007, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, then died 10 months later. After that, life quickly began to unravel, and both Sarah and David began acting out. The trauma of losing a parent is magnified for adopted kids who have already lost their birth mothers and foster mothers, so this loss was huge. Linda was far away from family support in Palo Alto and under a lot of stress. Single parenting was hard and lonely. Each new phase of growing up brought challenges. The adolescent years were particularly difficult. Sarah acted out while David withdrew and acted in. Though Linda herself is a therapist, she knew she needed help in dealing with the kids' struggles. She turned to educational consultant who told her about places where real healing can happen and help locate appropriate therapeutic programs. The kids' journeys were difficult with many ups and downs. Slowly but surely, things changed. Both kids are doing well. Linda has remarried a fine man named Steve who's devoted to her kids. A few years ago, they went to visit family friends where the teenage daughter was being extremely rude to her mom. When they got in the car to return home, Sarah said to Linda, "Mom, did I used to be like that?" Linda replied, "Yes." And Sarah said, "I can't imagine behaving like that now." As Linda has said, I felt I had a team of adults invested in helping my kids to grow and thrive. And even though it was a bumpy road, grow and thrive they have. I feel so grateful to have these 2 wonderful young adults in my life.
Kurt Vonnegut once wrote, "Pure terror is to wake up one morning and discover that your high school classmates are running the country."
Okay, maybe not exactly running the country, except we do have one Indiana State Senator, Dave Long, who I don't think is here. There's Russ Johnson, who holds national security clearances and was a satellite communications fellow with 10 patents. Carol Shaw, one of the top women game designers. Gina Rowland is an Islamic studies scholar and actress in England. Not long ago, Suzanne Brennan returned to school for her doctorate in psychology. Greg Zhang is a much beloved local dentist. Vince Sterla is an Emmy awarded producer at Dateline NBC. We have several law enforcement officials, Greg Monks and Greg Sincere. By the way, Greg, I would never trust someone who hasn't been busted at least once in their life. I'm just saying.
Janet Ransom and Susie Miller are avid and talented golfers. George Ulvang built and lives in a house in Mexico. Bob Haight hiked the entire Pacific Crest Trail. Greg Melberg cycled some 4,300 miles across the United States. Tony and Kathleen Hughes operate Ada's Cafe in Midtown, which employs adults with disabilities. We also have several accomplished musicians, George Glover and Bill Murphy. Healthcare workers like Liz Larson and Kathy Bjorn, and teachers who, of course, never get acknowledged nor paid enough. We also have a few therapists in the house, so that's probably helped all of us.
I often wonder if most of our lives, whether it be 25 years, 64 years, or 85, isn't mostly just filler, the setup for the few key moments and events in our lives, the actual purpose we bothered to come down to earth to begin with. It might be as brief as pulling someone out of the surf, or a lifetime committed to raising a disabled child, or creating a charitable foundation. For me, it has been the citizen diplomacy anti-nuke walks I undertook in the Soviet Union during the Gorbachev years, holding my mother's hand as she passed on, and most recently for 6 years helping a gay Iraqi refugee escape certain death. Seeing him arrive in Vancouver 2 years ago was the most fulfilling moment of my whole life.
Though we haven't had time to hear from everyone tonight, each person here has experienced challenges, revelations, undergone amazing journeys that, while helping others, has drawn them closer to their true selves. And now we have Chris Reynolds, who also adopted 2 children, is an architect who's worked in Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi, and is now living back in Sausalito. Chris is going to share about someone who hasn't been here in 50 years.
Okay, it's the same as when I was in high school. Hi, Karen. I always batted ninth, so I'm batting ninth tonight. You guys are all tired of this. So I'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. But many of you might not remember, but Pete Jelpe arrived in Palo Alto in ninth grade after living overseas for quite a while of his youth. He arrived in ninth grade, just about a year after I did the same, and having missed out on much of the bonding of elementary and junior high schools, he said he often felt out of place and alone. And there are therapists in the room, Pete, so we can take care of that now. But eventually, Peter became best chums with Neil Levitt. Is Neil here tonight? I haven't seen him anyway. And maybe it was through cross country, or maybe it was through science classes that Pete and I got to know each other. And he and I shared interests in biking and backpacking and great outdoors. We used to do fun stuff like telling Coach Jameson that we were going to go for a 5-mile run, and then we would go to Stanford Stadium and we would play 2-on-2 touch football with an empty soda can as the ball for about an hour, and then we go back all sweaty and tell the coach that we did the run. And then we did some really smart stuff, like we would try to see who could pass the most cars going down La Honda Road on our bicycles, and I think Pete might have held the record, or maybe it was Sam Jelpe who held the record. But we didn't have helmets in those days, and pretty nutty stuff. Peter majored in physics at UC Santa Cruz. He became a fireman and an EMT for some years. Then he returned to work in the Middle East for about 6 years after that. Later, he graduated from Wharton. He spent some time working at Aldus and Adobe, and then he passed several decades working as an entrepreneur in the nonprofit world of education and conservation, which we all need a lot more of. When the war in Ukraine erupted, Peter knew that more than just writing a check, he wanted to actually be there. He considered being a paramedic again, but that door appeared to be closed. And then after scouring Ukrainian refugee networks, a chance encounter with a Starbucks barista led Peter to a Romanian pastor who was running relief operations. And in a leap of faith and with the support of his wife, Carolyn, he packed his bags, he flew to Bucharest, and he caught a train to Suceava. Am I saying that right? Suceava? Okay, pretty good. Near the Ukrainian border. A smiling man with broken English greeted him. His name was Petru, also Peter. Thus began a partnership installing kitchens in Ukraine, just miles from the worst fighting, supporting old and ill and families hunkered down in basements, adopting 2 orphanages, providing clothing and generators, hosting, visiting medical teams, and offering glimmers of light with Christmas and Easter celebrations. With each new project, Peter returns to the USA to engage Americans, share stories, and secure financial support. Anybody bring their checkbook tonight? We'll be taking donations. Just joking, Pete. He just returned to California this past Monday. Back in Ukraine, the brutality continues, but Petru, the volunteer kitchen crews, the Romanian NGO partners remain steadfast and have become Peter's friends and extended family. Peter, like all of us, was fortunate to be reared in Palo Alto among generous souls and a progressive culture that encouraged us to expand our worldviews beyond the immediate. It helped set the foundation of values, ideals, and dreams that became Peter's compass in life.
Last year, my right knee was hurting, so I finally went to the doctor's. He checks it out, moves it about, gives it the ding thing, and so I asked, so what's wrong with it? He said, well, it's just old age. And I replied, well, if it's just getting old, then why doesn't my other knee hurt?
Ingrid Bergman once said, getting old is like climbing a mountain. You get a little out of breath, but the view is much better. Yes, some of us have bionic parts. Others have survived cancer, strokes, HIV, addictions, heart attacks, and heartaches, heartbreaks, but not to mention COVID. And all of us have had unsettling senior moments that make us cringe, but we're all in the same boat.
When we're young, talking about my generation. When we're young, we want to figure things out. We demand answers and explanations, whether it be through religion, spirituality, philosophy, or ideologies. As we get older and presumably a little bit wiser, we understand that the world is far more nuanced, filled with shades of gray. Murky corners of mystery are better embraced. Perfection is not only impossible, it's overrated and actually a bore. We learn to love not in spite of the flaws, but because the imperfections are what make us more human. When we're able to appreciate what we already have, there's much less to want. Rather than acquiring more stuff, more trophies, now the goal seems to be stripping away the unessentials, boring down to the core where lies our true contentment. And if it doesn't engender more kindness, then I say just toss it out. I think for many of us, that's the stage we're in now. Jim? Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can't hear up. Okay. I was asked to provide my perspective on the road I've traveled since our paths crossed 50 some odd years ago. Can't believe I'm Steve tonight, by the way. Steve Danger. It's pretty awesome. Before I do, I wanted to thank Bill, Lisa, Erica, and the rest of the team for putting together this show. I only have 3.5 minutes, so you're gonna have
Oh
to
no,
follow
you have
the
less
cues.
than that, man.
Okay. So my thoughts. As I mentioned in my autobiography, Waves of Life, quote, in the early 60s, the simplicity and relative safety of life in Palo Alto seems eons ago when compared to today's world. At that time, we did not appreciate the value of leaving the house after breakfast on a weekend or summer's day and having a standing instruction to be home by 10. Lunch was had wherever you were around noon. Play dates? Play dates did not exist, as we simply walked or rode our bikes down to a friend's house, knocked on the front door, and played. End quote. Sound familiar? Yeah. Okay. When you look at the world now, that period seems so amazing and so very long ago. And then life happened. Just as many of you have, I have since faced a few challenges from family tragedy, personal disappointments, addiction, note to Bill W. for all of you in the back, and other interesting health issues, mixed with all of my successes and joy and my remarkable wife, Dora. These events simply add up to a really good life. But here is small sampling, and I promise it's small, only 3, of things that I have learned since my time at Palo. First, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Used in those proportions, they will both serve you well. And it's not that we're not all brilliant. We are. But if we're always talking, we aren't listening. And we may be missing an opportunity to expand our perspective. Second, while it may not seem so in the moment, adversity is a tremendous teacher. As we did early in our lives, I suggest that we listen to that teacher, leverage our adversity, and avail ourselves of the opportunity to grow. And lastly, love is the greatest gift you can give or receive. This may be more obvious if you slow down, take the time to enjoy everyone around you and every moment that you have. Life is not forever, but the opportunity to experience it is limitless. Life is an amazing gift. Live it, learn from it, and love throughout it. Let me close by sharing some words from someone I consider to be the greatest poet of our time, Robert Zimmerman. Okay, who knows him? God, I knew this crowd would know. Okay. May your hands always be busy. May your feet always be swift. May you have a strong foundation when the winds of change shift. May your heart always be joyful, and may your song always be sung. And may you stay forever young. Be well.
Thank you, Jim. That was really beautiful and a wonderful way to close out the night. And all we want to do now is have a huge round of appreciation for the reunion committee. Lisa Stevenson-Wells, who's an accountant and kept the committee's finances on the straight and narrow. Jill Soltaw, who worked at Hewlett-Packard, found a green and white dress and is now a private chef. Greg Melberg, a retired architect who volunteers as a tour guide at Filoli. Tom Copenhagen, who retired from commercial construction and now fishes and manages a vineyard. Victoria Curtis, a lawyer who allowed us to come to her house yesterday and threw a beautiful party, and spends time renovating family properties. Annette Coleman, who's recently retired from working for decades at Foothill Park. Debbie Coleman, who's a caterer and is finally thinking about retirement. And Bill Murphy, a talented musician who has dedicated his later years to addressing climate change. We have Russ Johnson, who loves skiing and surfing and has opened his house many years in the past with his mother. And we have Bill Struby, who embodies that proverbial joke, so a Catholic, a Protestant, and a Jew walk into a bar because he's been all of those.
Or more like when I walked into our 20th reunion 30 years ago. I was just about to open the door of the ballroom at the hotel on El Camino, and I had a flash, an instantaneous revelation. I understood that in my whole being, that everyone inside had, in some small and big ways, become a part of who I am, who I will be, indelibly etched into my psyche and soul. Even if I wanted to, I could never escape you all. I was filled with awe, with joy, with gratefulness, with bliss. I opened the door and walked in to a family of souls.
It may be a little touchy-feely for some of you, so you can ignore me, and I was going to tell you go get a drink, but the bar is closed. So take a minute to look around at everyone, and we never know. It could very well be the last time. So perhaps give your friends a hug, a thank you for being a wonderful friend and for being in your life through thick and thin.
And a thank you for tumbling around in our rock tumbler together all these decades, for being in the same cookie batch, for being a part of our awesome constellation of stars, now in our very final phase, a constellation of stars helping to set each other free. Peace be with you all.
Bravo!